We're not whispering about a misspot.
Eavesdroppin.
Hello, Michelle.
Geordie, hello.
Welcome to the Eavesdroppers.
Welcome, welcome. It's an exciting time. We've got so much going on right now.
A lot. It's a ton. It's a ton of stuff in our lives. And in your lives too.
It's a bunch of stuff. Do you remember when people never used to say a bunch of stuff?
Well, I think you should just stop getting your knickers in a bunch, your panties in a bunch. Stop getting your panties in a bunch and take them out of that bunch. Remove it from your arse cheeks.
Oh, my God.
I like that saying. Well, it doesn't go as far as I've just gone, clearly.
Panties.
Panties in a bunch.
When did panties... I mean, it was always just pants. And then when you wanted to be a bit like sexy, you'd say panties.
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 I've got a little panties and bra set for my honeymoon.
Or it would be a panty liner.
A panty liner.
Panty liner.
Why is that so horrible? I mean, I have said the word, but why is it so awful? Listen, talking about honeymoons though, Michelle, we've a little surprise for our listeners, and it would have happened already. It's a new side hustle, if you like, because you know how we like to talk about TV. And at the moment, of course, we're watching Married at First Sight UK, aka MAFSUC, as we like to call it.
Yes.
We've teamed up with a fabulous extra expat Aussie TV lover called Jay, and he is going to join us for a lowdown as often as we can do it. We're not promising anything, not like Eavesdroppin. TBC is the date when it will drop. You'll find out more. But if you would like to search it in your podcasts, I'd go ahead right now and just tap in the name Show Dumpin'. That's correct. Show Dumpin'.
An eavesdropping production. Because we're producing it.
Producing.
And look, if you're not into maths, Married at First Sight, maybe it's not for you, but maybe if you listen, even if you don't know anything about it, you might become a fan. Look, there are people who are already going mad for maths UK, MAFSUC. So without saying too much, you're going to have to hear all the lowdown. When it drops, get on it. Show dumpin'. Show dumpin'.
We won't be talking about it on here. It will be on our Patreon. In fact, the first episode is exclusively behind the wall of Patreon, so you'll have to go in there and buy us a permanent coffee. So some of our regular listeners have exclusive first rights to those episodes, so good on you.
Yes.
And for the rest of you, join up if you want to be part of that party. But otherwise, just keep eavesdropping like you're doing, and that's fine. There's no expectation. We're not putting the hard word on you.
No, we're not. But I will say we love our patrons. We love them. They're so kind. And do you know what? We've actually had a flurry of messages in the mailbag.
When she says flurry, let me just point out there are 3 eavesdroppers who consistently communicate with us. They are Safka, Charlene, and Shari.
Aren't they the best?
They're not the only listeners, I like to think, but they are consistently chatting away with us. And we chat right back, don't we, Michelle?
Sometimes on the email, I'm a bit slow. Look, I do think we have to include Kiss Apocalypse in there as well.
Yes, and possibly Belly Button Guy, because he's sent more than one now.
Hi. Hey. But no, we have got some lovely messages in the mailbag. And maybe I'll start with a lovely message from Safka about the episode where I talked about Jen's illness in hospital and how I had been inspired to get her the fuck out of there by a video I happened to come across. And it was all about synchronicity, and go back and listen if you haven't. But she just said, thanks for sharing Jen's story and the story of the NDE. It was incredible. I totally believe in the power of the mind. And, you know, she says, much love to you, Jen, Geordie, and Bella. So Bella's now included. How sweet. Yeah. So
she's so thoughtful, that Safka, isn't she?
I know. So thank you so much, Safka. We really appreciate all the positive comments. We get a lot of shitty ones on YouTube, but we love the ones that come in the mailbag.
I also just saw one on the social media account from gorgeous Shari, who usually sends me a voice note when she's particularly moved or excited by an episode. But on this occasion, she couldn't because she's still choked up after listening to that episode 2 episodes ago, Michelle, when you told everybody about what you'd been through with Jen, what Jen had been through in the hospital, and we did our near-death experiences episode.
Yep.
She is so happy that Jen is back home. So she experienced something very similar.
Wow.
And it was quite traumatizing and probably reminded Shari of that. And that's why it affected her so deeply. I'm not going to read her message out word for word, but I just want to say that she says, please give Michelle all my love and thank her for sharing her story and the one she found on YouTube about Anita.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shari. Look, it's really amazing. So many people have contacted us outside of the mailbag, actually, just to say, my dad went through something similar. I had an experience where doctors were telling me, you know, my dad was going to die, and he was like, I'm fine. And we were there 24/7 around the clock in the hospital, and we got him out. And, you know, that was 3 years ago, and he's absolutely fantastic. If we'd listened to the doctors, who knows what would have happened. Sometimes doctors don't look at the picture holistically. You know, it's statistics, it's numbers on a chart.
Statistics.
Did I say statistics?
I think you did.
Oh, sorry. It's these bloody braces. God, when are they going to come off? So sick of them. Never. Yeah. So I think, you know, these medical stories, people have had experiences where beyond expectations, they've had certain outcomes. And I will say yesterday we had some amazing news. Anyone who'd listened to the episode knows that the hospital had, you know, inadvertently put Mum into kidney failure, and the prognosis was that she would never recover. Even when they released her, they said it will never recover. Well, just yesterday, we've had surprise news that the kidney has recovered by almost half of when she went in.
Wow.
And that is almost unheard of. The doctor sent a personal message to Mum saying,
she's a modern miracle of science.
In this day and age, what doctor sends a personal message to a patient?
Incredible.
It's
well,
amazing.
they're probably breathing a sigh of relief,
So
you know,
we.
thinking about some sort of, you know, legal action being
Well, I, you know,
launched.
That did cross our minds.
I'm sure.
You know, but sometimes when you go through these things, it's the last thing on your mind. You're just focused on the task, which is getting someone better. But it does cross your mind, I shouldn't even be in this fucking position if they had just not fucked up. It's all good. And thank you so much for the beautiful words of encouragement and care from our eavesdroppers. It really means a lot.
We love you. We heart you.
Heart, heart. True, Jen, true. True, Jen, true. So this week, Geordie,
Yes.
talking about persons who are missing.
Persons.
Persons gone missing. Missing persons.
Miss Purse.
Mispers. Oh my God, they are called mispers, aren't they?
They are. If anybody watches
Line of Duty, they will know it's a misper.
they'll know.
A misper.
Mispers. Misper.
We're not whispering about a misper, but it is a missing persons case. And look, I don't even know what I'm talking about.
What's happening, Michelle?
It's because I'm hopped up on green tea. It's about my third cup.
You've got your
this
titties in a
morning.
tangle.
Titties in it. Oh, what was it? Tough titties. Hard titties. Anyone who is Australian from the 80s.
Tough titty.
Tough titties, yes. That was about a cult, wasn't it?
It was. Yes, it was.
Oh, my goodness. I'll put a link to that for you patrons so you know what we're talking about. Anyway, moving on.
Yes, please.
This is a missing persons case. Yeah, thank you. It's a missing persons case.
God almighty.
God almighty. God almighty. Got there in the end, but not really. What the fuck is happening? Do you know what? It's the fucking green tea.
Too
I'm
much?
hyped. I'm probably even shaking. Look.
Well, you are. You're jazz hand.
Right. Missing persons. I don't even know how I found this case, but if you do go online and you search for this, particularly on Reddit, people are really moved by this case and freaked out by it because it doesn't add up. We're going back only a few years, actually, to the 5th of October 2018. No, I did not do what was in the charts because 2018, who gives a fuck?
Who gives a shit?
It was probably Adele. It's always Adele. Anyway.
Or Beyonce.
Or what's a little Ed Sheeran, the little baked bean. It's always him. So we're going to Idaho in the USA. Terrence Woods Jr. It's important we say Jr. He was a 26-year-old TV production assistant, and he was working in Oro Grande in the Nez Perce National Forest. He was there working on the first season of a documentary series for the Discovery Channel called Gold Rush, Dave Churin's Lost Mine.
Lost Mines?
No, M-I-N-E, Lost Mine.
That'd be a great TV show name, though, wouldn't it? Geordie Michelle's Lost Mines.
Lost
That's
Mines.
Basically the subtitle of this podcast.
It is today, let me fucking tell you.
Sure is.
Dave Churin's Lost Mine. It was being produced by a UK production company called Raw TV. And the premise of this doco-series, it's pretty basic. The host, Dave Churin, he's a quarry and mining expert. That's why it's about lost mines.
Who came up with this idea?
I know, riveting. He was going to go around different parts of the USA exploring disused mines. I'm tuning in.
It's so dull.
So the production crew for this was tiny. There were only 12 people on the crew. So everyone, really had to work together to get the job done. Just hours before Terrence went missing, he posted a pic on his Instagram of a fir tree forest with a river running through it. And it just had a one-word caption. It just said, Idaho. Now, pin that because we'll come back to this idea. On the evening Terrence disappeared, just as the shoot was wrapping up, Terrence apparently told one of the drivers for the crew, who was a local person, not part of the actual crew, that he needed to go to the loo. Moments later, associate producer Simon G, or G, G-E-E,
Mr. G.
Mr. G. Simon saw Terrence's radio just thrown on the ground, which was weird. And then he looked up to see Terrence running down a steep cliff, which led right into a very, very dense part of the forest.
Oh.
And apparently he simply just disappeared into the trees.
But he was glimpsed disappearing. It's not like he went poof.
No, he kind of ran into this forest.
And this guy saw that.
And within seconds, you can't see anyone.
No.
He's in that forest.
Wow.
And the thing is, apparently, Simon told Terrence's dad, Terrence Sr., very confusing, that Terrence was running so fucking fast. He'd never seen anyone ever run that fast. It was like a hare.
What?
He would just bolted into this forest.
Was it an incline, though, going downhill?
Yeah. And apparently off a cliff. So I don't know how you can see someone run into a forest and then run off a cliff. It's one or the other. A few things don't add up.
So
here.
he ran off a cliff.
This is also what has been said by Simon. These things to my mind don't add up. But we're going to find a few things that don't add up about this story. So apparently Simon was a bit freaked out and grabbed a few of the local helpers who were there for the crew, trying to run after him because they're like, what the fuck? But according to Simon, and this was in a Vice article I read about this case, some of the local helpers ran into the forest, but it was too thick. The trees were too thick and too dangerous, and they didn't get very far. And apparently when they returned, their clothes were torn and the clothes had blood on them.
What?
This has never been mentioned since about the blood, because if it had, I would be like, the blood's from how dense the forest was? Or could it be something else?
Something else.
It's strange. I guess the crew were pretty freaked out by what had just happened. And by 6:40 that night, they had reported Terrence's disappearance to the Idaho County Sheriff's Office. Thing is, at almost 7 o'clock at night, it's dark. It's dark in the woods at that time of year.
So they reported it so late that there is no way there could be a search that night.
Exactly. So the search for Terrence didn't start until the next day, when helicopters, dogs, search teams all began looking for Terrence. And they searched for him for 6 days, but they did not find anything. Not a shoe.
How did they get into the forest though? Did people go in like these locals that were on the shoot the day before?
There were helicopters, there were dogs, and there was infrared, so heat. They had heat, whatever, looking for, warm body. And also there was a guy who was a professional tracker from the military who was also enlisted. But I'll get to that in a minute, because for 6 days, and I think some obviously more experienced foresters were in there looking, but they found nothing. Didn't find any ripped pieces of clothing, didn't find anything either from the crew, who apparently had all these ripped clothes. So, 6 days, they called off the search. And to this day, his case remains open but inactive, meaning he's still considered a missing person, but...
That's fucking weird.
But no police man-hours being put into finding him or finding out what happened to him.
I'd say look in Simon's boot.
What do you mean?
I think he's in the boot of Simon's car.
I thought he meant his shoe. I'm like, in a boot? I was like, what's with the shoe? Okay. Oh, my God. Maybe. Well...
I've solved it. Move on. My turn. No.
The thing is, the police didn't search any of that stuff.
No. They didn't look at the crew or the director or anybody on site that day as suspicious.
It's a little bit like when we talked about Amy Wensley. The police were considering this a missing persons case, not anything else. So no forensics, nothing. And look, and to be fair, they're in the middle of a forest. It is the first thing. If someone says they're missing, you kind of think they're missing. But, according to Terrence's family and friends, and us and me, this version of what happened to Terrence, I think, just doesn't add up. Now, going back to that article I read on Vice.com, the journalist for Vice said that they saw the original Idaho County Sheriff's Office report, which says Terrence, according to the crew, was having a really hard time emotionally and had had a mental breakdown earlier that day. The reason the report says this is because the person who made the 911 call to report Terrence missing, and who was a local, not part of the Raw TV crew, said that Terrence had had some mental health struggles during the shoot, which at this stage had only been a few days. Right. But when that person was pushed to verify what they had said a few weeks after Terrence had gone missing, they retracted their statement. Now, this has led Terrence's parents to believe something else is at play here.
Fishy.
And that Raw TV is potentially hiding something about the events of that day. And in fact, according to the Vice article, the parents believe that Terrence, as the only black crew member, might have felt intimidated or maybe was being mistreated by his colleagues. Although obviously Raw TV strongly deny this. Now, according to Terrence's dad, Terrence Sr., Raw TV was a bit off with him when it came to kind of disclosing the news of Terrence's disappearance. And apparently, because Simon G was the last person to see Terrence, he was the one that told Terrence Sr. about what had happened and that his son had gone missing.
Yeah.
A week later, Raw TV flew Terrence Woods Sr. and Terrence's mum, Valerie Woods, who are not together, from Maryland to Idaho, where Simon and another Raw TV employee met with them at the sheriff's office. This is a week later. According to Terrence Sr., and this is a quote, the first thing Simon said on the phone, and also when I met him in the police department, was, I had high expectations for your son, but when I met him, he didn't stand up to them.
What?
And I mean, if that is true, what the actual fuck? Because you do not say to someone's parents when they are...
Who is this guy?
I know. Like, if you're informing them your son's gone missing, you don't say, and by the way, he was shit at his job.
Yeah.
Right? It gets worse because according to Terrence Sr., Simon then said, quote, I asked Terrence to get me some fruit and he turned to me and said, what kind of fruit? And this was meant to be an indicator of Terrence being shit at his job.
Is this Simon guy, is he some kind of sociopath?
I don't know. There is nothing about this guy. So Simon Terrence Sr. was like,
what a wanker.
What the fuck? And he obviously felt that it was inappropriate.
Yeah.
And also not an indication that Terrence was shit at his job, because honestly, if someone says to me, oh, can you get me some fruit? I'd be like, okay, do you want a banana or an apple?
Yeah.
Like, what do you want? It's not a weird question. Then Valerie also apparently got a weird phone call from Simon, who also said to her, basically, Terrence was shit at his job. And then launched into, I saw him run off into the forest. It's just weird. So Raw TV again denied that anyone on the team expressed disappointment in Terrence's work, although they did say that Simon had called Terrence Sr. to ask about Terrence's state of mind under the guise of he wanted to give that information to the search and rescue team, because obviously if Simon had had previous mental health concerns, then, that might be helpful to the search and rescue. But Simon then said Terrence had been distracted at times. So this to me shows that something was going on with the crew. Maybe Terrence wasn't fitting in. Maybe he wasn't liked. Maybe they did think he was shit at his job. But according to Terrence's mum and dad, pretty soon after the search was called off, Raw TV pretty much washed their hands of the whole situation and distanced themselves entirely from Terrence's disappearance. I'm saying a lot of here, and with braces, this is hard, so I've got to apologise. Terrence's friend and former colleague, a woman called Gia Tabasco, told Vice that she does not get why Raw TV pulled away from this whole thing. And she said, is it because he was a junior member of staff, or is it because he's black?
Yeah.
And this thing about his race keeps coming up. Yeah. Now, going back to this idea of him being shit at his job, according to Terrence's university teachers, ex-colleagues and his friends, Terrence was the dream employee. He worked hard, he was super responsible, and apparently he was a joy to be around. And according to a woman called Bethany Swain, who was one of his professors at university, he had always been a dream to work with, and he had a goal, he had a dream to work in London. And she says he was one of her top students. And she cites this scenario where she had been working at CNN when she had started teaching, and she was doing night classes, and he was, at one of the night classes that she taught. And she said immediately Terrence stood out above the others because he was eager and he was really devoted to what he was doing. He was hardworking, and, things like if there was extra work to be done, he'd put his hand up and say, I'll do it. I'll shadow you. I'll do all sorts of things. So he was really into wanting to do it. And he did achieve his dream, and he moved to London for 5 years and worked in telly. Huh. Maybe one of the Beacon twins worked with him on one of these reality shows because he did things like The Voice UK.
Right in, Beacons.
Right in. And when news of Terrence's disappearance hit London, because it did make the news, it freaked his ex-colleagues out. There's a tweet from 2019 from a London colleague which says, quote, I lost touch with him when he moved back to the USA from London, and I was Googling his name to see if he wanted to meet up because I was planning to go to Washington, D.C. I did not expect to find that he was missing.
Wow.
So, he had friends, and I think he was well liked.
Yep.
And, Gia Tabasco, who met Terrence in 2016, described Terrence as the most pure person.
Oh, my gosh.
And that Terrence's disappearance just does not make sense. A lot of colleagues who Terrence worked with are really scared to speak out. They want to remain anonymous.
Wow, what is going on?
Because they say they think they're going to be punished by the TV industry because it's a small industry. But they did say off the record and anonymously that at Raw TV, there was a really laddie culture at that company.
Right.
And this is a quote, there was a toxic undercurrent. There were conversations where they would make disparaging comments about people they were looking to hire. It made me feel quite uncomfortable.
Gee whiz.
Now, this person who also apparently worked on that Gold Rush series said for them, Raw TV was one of the most difficult places they'd ever worked. So what the fuck? That's an insight into that work culture. What's going on here? Was Terrence going through some kind of burnout? Was he going through some kind of mental health crisis? Or was there something else going on here?
But remind me, Michelle, did you say that this was like day 3 of the shoot?
Yeah, it's early. So I've got a little timeline. When Terrence began his job at Raw TV for Gold Rush, it was September 30th, 2018. His dad dropped him off at Reagan National Airport outside of Washington, D.C. And later that day, Terrence Jr. called his dad to say he'd reached the first stop on his itinerary, which was Missoula, Montana, where he met up with the rest of the crew from Raw TV. Then his dad didn't hear anything from him for the next 3 days. On Thursday, October 4th, the crew finished shooting in Montana and they went to Grangeville, Idaho. And Terrence then texted his dad, "Hey Dad, just got to the hotel in Idaho." Then just before midnight, Terrence called his dad at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh.
And the conversation was, and this is a quote from his dad. He said, "Hey Dad." I said, "Hey, you know I got to go to work in the morning." He said, "I was just calling you." I said, "You okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And I said, "All right, I'll call you later." And that was the last phone call I had with him.
Oh, no.
6 hours later, the dad got another text that said, "I'm coming home Wednesday on the 10th. This was 5 weeks earlier than planned.
Right. Something happened.
So he wanted out of there.
Yeah.
Something happened. The dad texted back saying, quote, "Good. See you when you get home. Don't forget my shot glass." Because apparently Terrence would buy his dad a shot glass from all the places he went. Yeah. So Terrence did not reply to that last text. And weirdly, I read that and I'm like, why didn't the dad say, "What's going on? Why are you leaving the shoot 5 weeks early?" It's such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, he's a grown-up kid. He's not a kid anymore. He's a grown-up. He's probably thinking, the nature of television could be that weather stopped filming.
Yeah.
Who knows? He knows his son's been in this industry for a while. He probably knows the pitfalls and the different things that can happen.
And in fact, an interviewer said, "Why didn't you ask?" And he said, "Well, I just was like, oh, great, he's coming home." He said he didn't sort of think to ask. I don't know. I don't know why he didn't ask, "Why are you coming home?" but then said, "Don't forget my shot glass." To me, it's like, okay, whatever. Yeah. But, the dad did say at that point, he didn't sound upset or distraught in the text. It didn't have that feeling. After Terrence went missing, the dad later found out from Raw TV that Terrence had told them he had to leave early because his mum was having surgery, which was bullshit.
Oh.
There was no surgery happening. Like you said before, something is going on for that kid to make up an excuse like that. Then at 7:40 a.m. on October 6th, the day after Terrence went missing, that's when the dad got a phone call from Raw TV saying his son went off a cliff. So the whole thing is that Terrence's dad does not believe a word of what Raw TV is saying. In fact,
and I'm not surprised.
He's got a theory that Terrence never even made it to Idaho.
Oh.
There's a pic on Instagram that says Idaho.
As you said, to pin. Yes, I've pinned that.
Exactly.
As you requested.
There's a lot of eyewitness statements saying that he was in Idaho doing the shoot, but it's the crew and it's the locals who worked for the crew. So are they all closing ranks?
If he never made it, how did they get their hands on his phone to post a fake Idaho shot on his Instagram?
You can do that if you've got someone's phone.
Right, you're saying that he didn't. Oh, fucking hell. Something underhand has happened here.
I mean, imagine if something happened in Montana and then, I don't know, misadventure, murder, then they're like, fuck.
Right.
We've got to do a trail here. Post a pic from Idaho, send a pic to his dad.
Why? But why do we have to do this? I mean, that's outrageous. Why don't we just contact the authorities and explain that there's been an accident or, something got out of hand? Don't close ranks. That's disgusting. If something had happened in a bar or there was this, some sort of altercation that ended in tragedy.
Or an accident. But either way, look, that's just a theory. That's Terrence's dad's theory.
Well, he's not alive, that's for sure. He's not missing. He's fucking dead.
He is dead.
His body is missing.
He is dead, although the dad still holds hope. But I guess that's a parent's prerogative.
Of course he does.
But look, I think he probably did make it to Idaho. I just think, like you sort of said, something happened. Maybe he saw something. Maybe he heard something.
Yeah.
Didn't want to get involved. I don't know. Could be wrong place, wrong time.
And his life was expendable. That's disgusting. I hate that. It just makes me think of Al Fayed for some reason. I don't know why.
Oh, God, I don't know either, but that's terrible. But look, according to Terrence's family and friends and all his previous colleagues, Terrence did not suffer from any mental health struggles, not anxiety, not panic attacks, not depression. So all the people out there online, and there are a lot, saying that he had mental health issues, it's questionable and it's not verified. So is this foul play, or did Terrence really just run into the woods for no reason? Sheriff Doug Giddings, he says it's full on out there, and he says, there's no sound, there's no nothing, it's rough. There are bears, there are cougars, you've got coyotes, you've got bobcats. And he also says that, there are these abandoned mines that have these air vents that are hard to see. You can easily fall in if you don't know it's there. And like I said before, there was a military officer, and he was an expert tracker, who kind of reckons he could have found slide marks near the bottom of an embankment where Terrence could have run down, which is close to a road. But there is no proof that it was a slide. It was no proof that it was Terrence that made this slide. It could have been one of these bobcats or an animal or a bear, who knows. But the fact that the slide mark was near a road did raise a few questions. That could Terrence have flagged down a car, left the mountain, but the police checked with people in the local area. No one saw anything weird or out of the ordinary. No one saw any strange cars.
And if that was the case, why wouldn't he have called his dad and said, come get me, some shit's gone down? The reason why I think I said Al Fayed is because it's toxic work environment, toxic workplace environment. And by the way, since I first started speaking about Al Fayed in Harrods and his grooming and sexual misconduct, that's blown up. There are so many stories coming out of Harrods right now. It's absolutely out of control on the scale of Savile.
Oh my
It's bad.
God, that's horrific.
But going back to Terrence, when you started the story, you said that he was in a car. He'd been picked up by a driver who was not affiliated with the shoot. He was a local driver, no?
There was a driver who he said, apparently, if you look at the events, according to Simon G., Terrence dropped the radio, then said to one of the local drivers, I need to go to the toilet, bolts into the woods.
Yes.
Into the forest.
So this local driver has no affiliation with Raw TV production company apart from being hired by them on that occasion.
Yes.
He doesn't work in the television industry. There is no reason to close ranks. So if he actually clocked eyes on Terrence, then that means he was there.
Yes, and there are eyewitnesses that say he was there, but were they paid off? You just don't know. But essentially, Geordie, we have a guy who wanted to leave the set. He wanted to leave that crew.
Yeah.
He was supposedly seen running off a cliff for no reason or into the woods.
Yeah.
Never been seen again. So did something sinister happen? Was there an accident the crew are covering up? Or did he just have a mental break? Did he just run off into the woods or over a cliff, never to be seen again for no reason? And Geordie, I think sadly for Terrence's family, I don't think we're ever going to get any answers to this.
No, doesn't sound like it. That's heartbreaking.
So that's the story of Terrence. And sadly, I feel like we need to say R.I.P. because I don't think he's coming back.
R.I.P. Terrence. You know what? He sounds like a really lovely guy and I feel really heartbroken to hear this story.
Yeah.
Eavesdroppin'! Eavesdroppin'! Eavesdroppin'!
Eavesdroppin'!
Eavesdroppin'! Well, Michelle, I too have a heartbreaking story. Sorry about it. But I guess when you're talking about missing people, it is always going to be a heartbreaker.
Yeah, of course.
Again, I'm going to mention some years, and I did not do the top 10 because I don't feel it's appropriate in this time, and also because it's post 2000s, so who gives a shit, like you said. I'm going to start in 2009 when Rebecca Vance met Eric, a recent divorcee at the computer chip company where she worked, and he worked as well, Atmel. And this is in Colorado area in the USA. Now, Rebecca had a mum who she loved dearly, and her mother had recently died of cancer in 2007 and remarried. And she had a beautiful family with the mother's new husband and her sister, who's a year younger, Christine, and some siblings from the father's side, the new stepfather's side. And this is Rebecca's life, okay? And after a year with this guy, Eric, from work, who was recently divorced, Eric also had custody of his two young children, and he lived with his mum, Marilyn. And these two, Rebecca and Eric, got together for a year, but then they broke up. And Rebecca got pregnant, but she didn't tell him about it.
Oops.
So their ex-relationship, they're still working together, and it was actually a colleague who told Eric that she had given birth.
How do you not know?
I don't know. Maybe she didn't turn up for work for those 9 months. I don't know the details about this. But he did go to the hospital to visit Rebecca and his new son, Talon, Talon, he was named, at the hospital. But Rebecca did not put Eric's name on the birth certificate. But despite this, Rebecca allowed Eric and his mum, Marilyn, to see Talon, and gradually Talon became part of Marilyn and Eric's extended family and his two children as well. So they would split their time between both parents, but mostly he was with his mum, Rebecca, Talon was, and it was clear there was a lot of love between the mother and the son. However, Rebecca's nature was reclusive, and her stepsister, Travalla, said she always had been that way, and she never really liked being around people. Travalla also said that Rebecca's mum's death took a huge toll on Rebecca and sent her further into herself. Then Travalla's dad died in 2019, and both Christine and Rebecca, whose mum had married Travalla's dad, adored this guy like a father. They absolutely loved him.
I think I'm a bit lost already. So do I need
to start the whole story again?
No. It's just all the names. I'm like, who's married to who?
So Travalla is the stepsister.
Okay.
Rebecca and Christine are the sisters.
Yep.
Rebecca's younger sister is Christine.
Okay.
Rebecca and Eric had an affair at work. A baby called Talon was born.
Yes.
Eric is the ex. Eric's mum is Marilyn.
Yep.
Okay, are we keeping up?
I'm keeping up.
And Rebecca is beside herself because her mum died in 2007, and then the stepfather, Travalla's dad, died in November 2019. So this has affected them all terribly. And then shortly after that, what happened, Michelle? The pandemic.
Oh, God, of course.
Travalla, who is the stepsister, said that this was the straw that broke the camel's back for Rebecca. Rebecca left her job at Atmel, a job she'd had forever since she left school, in August 2021. And people just thought that she'd found a job she could do from home. But Rebecca had actually been caught up in conspiracy theories online.
No.
Because she'd spent much of the pandemic glued to her computer, obsessed with the theories about the end of the world and what this vaccine meant and what the pandemic meant for the world. So now she's fearing vaccines, technology, the power of global elites, and she wanted to be far away from people and their influences. Her stepsister, Travalla, mentioned that Rebecca felt the pandemic and politics brought out the worst in humanity. And at the time, she had been contacted by a friend, and she said to him, I know I probably sound like a conspiracy theorist, but there are insane plots to take away our soul and humanity. If you've never heard about the Great Reset, WEF, which is the World Economic Forum, Fourth Industrial Revolution, then please look up Yuval Noah Harari, Klaus Schwab, and their agenda. And that's from Rebecca, right?
Oh, shit. She got cued.
Side note, Klaus Schwab, for those who don't know, is a Swiss economist, and he founded the World Economic Forum in 1971. And in June 2020, he proposed a series of initiatives called the Great Reset to reduce inequality and promote environmental care. So this was early pandemic. And it was also to help manage the COVID-19 pandemic. This World Economic Forum launched Great Reset. Conspiracy theorists believe that lockdown measures were intended to cause economic collapse and usher in a socialist world order to benefit those already in power.
Well, yeah, if you believe that.
And Yuval Noah Harari, a name I'd never heard of before, is an Israeli historian and best-selling author known for his works like, he's got a book called Sapiens and Homo Deus, which explore human history, technology, and modern society. How he feeds into the conspiracy theorists and what his agenda is, I didn't bother to find out. Back to Rebecca and Eric's son, Talon Vance. He was 13 in 2022 and lived most of his time with Rebecca and her sister Christine. They lived together in an apartment block in suburban Colorado Springs. However, in August that year, Rebecca planned to leave the comforts of home to establish a permanent off-grid lifestyle and stay safe from these potential real-world terror threats that she'd immersed herself in online. You're right.
No, it's good. It's good.
So on the 1st of August, Rebecca and Talon went to his grandma Marilyn's house and dropped off a photo album and other mementos of Talon. And Rebecca told Marilyn at the time that they were leaving because they had to move to be safe.
Oh.
And when Marilyn said safe from what, Rebecca wouldn't explain. She didn't explain. She just said she was really vague about the destination. And she said that she, Talon, and her younger sister, Christine, would be driving to West Virginia where their biological father lived. But Marilyn thought, oh, Talon's never even met this guy. They've never spoken about this man. Why are they going there? But then Rebecca whispered to Marilyn, don't bring it up because Talon doesn't know. He thinks we're just going camping.
Oh, no.
So at first, Rebecca's younger sister, Christine, who she was very close with and lived with, was having none of this whole plan of ditching society and going off-grid. She felt they didn't have enough survival experience. But in late July 22, Christine told their stepsister, Travella, that she changed her mind and would go with Rebecca and Talon to support them. She thought it would be better.
She probably thought I need to keep a fucking eye on them because...
She's obviously reacting to something that she feels is a threat.
Yeah.
But she's ill-prepared for this anyway. Everybody knows it. And Travella said to both sisters, please don't go into the woods. Just go to our place in South Park. We've got an RV and a generator. So apparently her and her husband, Tommy, Travella, the stepsister, had this off-grid property in Colorado Springs. Perfect, right?
Well, why wouldn't they just go there?
Well, Christina said that Rebecca wanted something more remote. And I'm thinking possibly she was concerned that she had taken Talon out of school all this time and maybe taking it off grid was a step too far and social services might come and grab him.
Right, so she was in hiding in a way.
Possibly, yeah. So Christine gave Travella their mum's ashes and asked her to find someone to take care of her cat. But when she handed over the ashes, she didn't say, just look after them for me. She just gave them to her. Like I'm coming back to get them. So it felt like it was a very permanent arrangement, them going off grid. So a little about Talon. According to his grandmother, Marilyn, she said he wasn't well socialized. He had friends in elementary school, but when COVID hit, he was finishing 5th grade. And I think elementary is like primary school. And Rebecca pulled him out and put him in the school district's online program for the next 2 years. Rebecca decided he should stay in online school even after the pandemic died down. She didn't even want him going into school to collect the laptop that they were supposed to use at home.
Right. So she's become really paranoid. She's isolating herself and him from everything and everyone.
Any negative influences from the outside world. And don't forget, that's her nature anyway. So before the pandemic hit, she was already reclusive. But Talon, he had an iPad, but he wasn't allowed to go on social media. And he played games like Super Mario Brothers, Minecraft, Roblox, all the usual things that my kids play. And as the time got closer to him leaving, he started telling his Roblox friends that he would soon be going without really explaining why. It turns out he did actually know about this plan to go off-grid, but he just never said anything.
Right. Okay.
So we've got Travella still urging her sisters to reconsider going, but Rebecca wouldn't even tell her or confirm the whereabouts of where they were headed. Where they actually went, Michelle, was a place called Gold Creek Campground, which was in a valley known for really heavy snow.
Oh, shit.
And this is summer when they headed there. So let me just explain the area. There's a place called Fossil Ridge, which is like the starting point for this amazing wilderness spot with lakes, granite peaks, tons of moose, mule, deer, elk. So not like your woodlands with the bobcats, etc. This is a bit more cold because it's Colorado area, I suppose. And the campground there's a campground there. It's open from May to September. It has 6 campsites in a little circle, and it's a nice little popular spot for summer hikers and backpackers. But in winter, they all leave, and then the hunters arrive to hunt all the moose and the elks and the whatnots that I just mentioned earlier. The family, little trio, started by camping in the designated areas like everybody else. And then they gradually moved about 200 yards east. So I don't really know how far that is. I didn't do the kilometres in the metres.
It's not far.
Doesn't seem like far, does it? The information I've got says that they crossed Gold Creek, which is spanned by several large logs. On the other side of the creek, there are no trails and there's relatively heavy vegetation until you climb a rise to reach a wetland, which is seasonal, so it comes and goes with the seasons, and lots of ponds. And at the foot of the slope, they then set up a camp in a clearing surrounded by tall spruce trees with a little stream that flowed down into a small pond. Okay. Now, I'm going to point out right now that's probably not fresh water. For shelter, they put together a lean-to, which is just like a very kind of hastily erected sort of, not an all-year-round shelter.
No, it's kind of, if you've ever seen Alone, which we've talked about it on...
Naked and Afraid?
As No, it's just called Alone. It's a tele-rec where you go out and you have to survive the longest. And they basically just put a lean-to, which is a tarp and a bit of wood, and it's a shelter. It's basically a roof over your head.
Yeah. Well, they had that, but they also had a tent, which is like a really cheapy kind of like just not even canvas, one of those polypropylene, whatever you call them, the usual kind of like cheapy tent things for them. And they had used really not probably the right tools, things like hacksaws instead of saws and axes and things. Oh. And the lean-to was about 4 feet tall. The roof was made of branches. And then it faced a hole that was dug out into the hillside for storage. They probably had a tarp over the top of that to put some extra shelter between the two spots. So they had this dugout where they put all their gear. They had their lean-to, which was probably for hanging out in bad weather. And then they had their tent for sleeping in, we're assuming.
Can you just imagine the mindset you would have to be in to think that that was okay?
Michelle, I would last 3 days in the summer. I have a caravan.
I don't even know if I would last that. Like, to dig out and to make some shit shelter, which if you're digging out for your stuff, you're intending to stay there for a bit longer than 3 days.
Like, she intended to be there forever.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
With a lean-to? Oh, they have no clue. This is not going in a good direction.
Now, I mentioned earlier about the water not being good for drinking. So they brought along these things called life straws, which are used for hikers, not long-termers, to purify water. Cold weather will ruin the straws. You can't continue using them. They lose their usefulness.
Ability to purify.
Yeah, exactly. And it turns out that they ate mostly prepared food, so things that they could buy in tins and cans and whatnot, because there was rubbish found at the campsite, which included cans, wrappers for ramen noodles, tins of soup, fruit juice containers, hot dogs, chocolate bars, tin tuna, that kind of thing. It's not really living off the land.
That's not even food.
And if you've gone totally off grid, I don't know how you're supposed to sustain yourself like that. But financially, they obviously had used all their money. And at some point in the autumn, possibly around October, Rebecca called their birth father, who was out in West Virginia or wherever I said earlier, and asked him to send $500 to a Gunnison supermarket. Gunnison was a nearby town to where they'd camped. And he did.
Oh,
he did.
Him.
He sent them the money through, but that was the last known contact from this group to anyone. Around the same time, a Forest Service ranger who was visiting the campsite noticed Rebecca's old Hyundai sedan parked at the Gold Creek campground. And since nobody was on the campsite, he flagged it as being possibly abandoned. And then by November, it got towed away.
Shit.
So fast forward, Michelle, to about a year after those three had left, news of their whereabouts finally arrived for Marilyn on July 24, 2023. They'd left August 22. Unfortunately,
I have a feeling I know where this is going.
It is heartbreak. Yeah, it's bad. Their lack of contact with society.
Well, their lack of contact with society wasn't due to a deliberate, we're not contacting anyone. It's something worse.
It was a choice, though, to begin with. They didn't want anyone to find them. Unfortunately, somebody did find them. A hiker who was hiking in July, came across their camp and went back to, quite late, unfortunately, in the day, to the Gunnison County Sheriff's Office to mention that they had found what they thought was a mummy. Yeah.
Oh, my God. Just one?
Well, at that point, the hiker found this and then took off to contact authorities. It was patchy service for mobile phones and whatnot. So the authorities went there the next day. They found the other two bodies in a blue tent in the isolated campsite.
Oh, God.
Investigators found piles of the rubbish that I mentioned earlier. Yeah. Plus, Michelle, brace yourself, a lot of dried poo, basically diarrhea.
Oh.
And the whole area just smelled appalling.
No.
Yeah.
So they got dysentery or something from that. Well, they weren't purifying their water. No.
But no, it was over a year and that straw wouldn't work anymore. The mummy was a little more than a husk, unfortunately, because the body had been left out. The skin was dark and leathery from exposure, missing part of an arm, bones were visible. At first, they couldn't tell if it was male or female. It was located away from the tent. And then they opened up the tent. Sorry, Michelle. They found the next two bodies, also mummified. One was curled up in a sleeping bag. And then they started their investigations and they figured out that the person who was outside died first, clearly. And the investigators theorized that because it was the middle of winter, the other two didn't want to sleep next to a dead person. So they put them outside until they could do something about it. But then they must have died too.
Yeah. I mean, missing part of an arm, that one outside. Do you think a little moose had a chomp or something? Something's had a chomp. That's terrible. But also, they clearly were not well.
They weren't well.
They probably didn't take medicine with them for any kind of diarrhea medication or any kind of medication. Or if they did, it ran out. They weren't prepared with skills or food. I mean, a little tiny tent is not going to protect you from the elements.
It wasn't enough, not by a long shot.
Fucking hell.
The bodies inside the tent, it turns out, belonged to the sisters, and the body outside, very, unfortunately, very sad. It was little Talon. I'm so upset about that.
Oh, no.
This whole story had me in floods of tears, actually. It was absolutely so heartbreaking. The coroner and the investigators contacted the extended Vance family, but they couldn't locate Talon's father because no one in the Vance family knew his last name.
What?
Well, because she didn't put his name down on the birth cert, and she never told that family about Marilyn and the other guy.
All right. Yeah, fair enough, I guess.
7 weeks after the corpses were discovered, the autopsy came through. And it's really heartbreaking, Michelle, but Talon's body only weighed about 40 pounds, which is 18 kilos. He's a 14-year-old boy at that point. And investigators say that the group definitely suffered. And their best guess was that the diarrhea found at the campsite was caused by giardia in their drinking water as a result of inadequate filtration or boiling.
Oh my God. That's the thing. Like if you drink bad water, you get sick, you get diarrhea, you can't have any nutrients stay in your body, you get weak, you're probably dizzy.
There's all of that.
All of that on top.
That's exactly what happens. It leaves them too weak and disoriented to seek help. There was also still an unopened packet of ramen noodles left behind. So they essentially starved to death, these three, right? But they were just too weak to do anything about it.
Yeah.
So Talon's family, devastated, obviously. They remembered how he was both scared and excited at the same time about his first camping trip. And obviously he didn't know what off-grid entailed, but he just wanted to be with his mum. And the only preparation that they did was learning how to tie knots and watching a few YouTube videos on how to survive, according to Travala. Plus, they had all of his journals as well, because he kept journals.
If you're full of conspiracy theories and you want to go off grid, there must be some part of your brain which is like, well, how hard can it be? I just need a tent and a bit of food.
This is why it's so dangerous, Michelle. The post-pandemic conspiracies, they would often revolve around the idea of this, like I said before, authoritarian socialist world government run by powerful capitalists and politicians. And if that sounds like an oxymoron, well, you're right. It absolutely is. Far left government being run by capitalists. I mean, they're both opposing extremes. And then there's this secret cabal that affects all the people in the world.
Yep.
It's just crazy in a way. I mean, obviously there is a nugget of truth in all of this. Of course, we don't know what's going on behind the great curtains of authority. But this great reset, which was basically adopted by anti-vaccine or Trumpy kind of, what do you call it? What's it called again? QAnon believers and other conspiracy theorists. It was launched by Professor Klaus Schwab, as I said before, leader of the World Economic Forum. They have an annual summit in a Swiss ski resort for the wealthiest and most powerful people. And this was endorsed at the time by Prince Charles, now King.
I think it's Davos.
Davos, that's exactly it. So they believed that Prince Charles at the time and Klaus Schwab were all a part of this grand conspiracy by the global elite and that they'd planned and managed the COVID-19 pandemic. And Schwab had actually said at the time, the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine and reset our world to create a healthier, more equitable and more prosperous future. And Prince Charles backed him up by saying, we have an incredible opportunity to create entirely new sustainable industries. The time to act is now. So this is how the anti-climate change theorists came about as well.
Okay.
So they also believe Well, that's where that nugget comes from anyway.
But the thing is, they had a point. Like, if you had approached the pandemic in a different way, there could have been different opportunities, but everyone was just panicked about living and then getting these vaccines and then anti-vaccines. It's like it was just a wild time in history.
Yes. And of course, there are issues with the vaccines and there are vaccine injuries and they haven't been investigated.
Yep.
A lot of the people at the time, without the proper knowledge, were claiming, this is the people who Rebecca was listening to, were saying things like the vaccines contained microchips to enslave people and that at some point something was going to go off and control us all like zombies. This is what people believed.
Yeah.
And also they didn't feel they could trust mainstream media or politicians, obviously except for Trump and Farage. Somehow they're the heroes of this story. Going back to that kind of microchip enslaving people, there was a theory before October 4, 2023 in the United States when they had their emergency broadcast system tests to all mobile phones, which we had in the UK at some point. I missed it. I don't know where I was. People believed that that was going to activate the nanoparticles such as graphene oxide that had been introduced into our bodies through the vaccines.
Right.
And conspiracy YouTubers were begging their followers to turn off their phones on the day of the test because they believed it was part of the conspiracy to control the population.
I mean, would you have turned your phone off just in case?
Probably. But I'd say the amount of staff, the amount of mobile phones around me probably would have activated my graphite oxide and allowed me to be enslaved. One of the conspiracy theorists that I read said the emergency broadcasting system under FEMA is going to be activated. It's not a test. It's going to be sending these high-frequency signals into cell phones, radios, TVs. The intention of activating nanoparticles, including graphene oxide.
Which is all running through our veins and there's nothing we can do about it. We're just going to be activated.
Nothing we can do if that's the case. We're fucked.
Like a zombie robot, like, meh, yep.
Meh, I will work for you. Don't worry about AI. I will do it all for you.
You want a cup of tea? Fuck you. Here's a scotch.
It's worth noting that this has been an ongoing discussion since the 1960s, at least, about the potential emergence of a totalitarian world government. And that's often been referred to as the New World Order. This concept draws on historical conspiracy theories dating back to the 18th century, which we have discussed, Michelle, on this very podcast. In fact, you can see episode 6, series 3 on the Illuminati for a bit more information.
Yes.
But there's many, many more because we love a conspiracy. And somehow that got into my story, which was tragic, about 3 missing people in the woods.
Do you know what? It's so avoidable what happened to them. If she had just talked to somebody, had some time away from her computer, got a different perspective, maybe she could have not gone into the woods and basically had this terrible ending.
Exactly. I just don't know why she risked her son's life in that way.
She thought she was saving him, Geordie. That's the thing. The perspective was skewed. She was like, I'm saving him. I'm doing the best thing for my loved ones, for my sister and my son.
Something occurred to me as well, because they were taking trips. In his journal, there was like, oh, yay, I got to go into the supermarket in Gunnison and I bought all these yummy things. It was a treat.
Ramen.
No, it was things like sweets and whatnot.
Okay.
He chose chocolate bars for his mum to keep her happy rather than the candy that he wanted. It was really sweet to read. And I wish I hadn't read it because now my heart is absolutely shattered into a million pieces. But if they had have wanted to cut and run when shit got bad, the car had been towed by November that year.
Yeah.
It was gone.
But if those bodies were mummified, they were already dead by November. Like the cold had already set in. Yeah, I think so. I think they died pretty fast.
October, they had gone to the shops. They'd called the dad. I think that's too soon. Or maybe they just got really sick from the water. Who knows the timeline?
I don't know the timeline, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was pretty fast because the cold weather comes in quickly. They wouldn't have known what to do. They probably were already sick. The water, they're trying to make tea and ramen and whatever, and they're getting sicker and sicker because they're all water foods.
But you boiled that water.
Yeah.
If you boil it, it's okay, but you do need to filter it as well, I think.
I think you need to filter it. And also too, was there any evidence of a fire?
Yes, there
okay.
was. Yeah, they did have a fire.
I don't know. My intuition is that it happened pretty fast. Oh, that is a terrible story, but...
I know, I'm sorry.
Oh, this is been a doom and gloom ep.
It has.
It has.
So sad. If you want some perking up, then why don't you just pop along to Show Dumpin' or the Patreon for some fun stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
To cheer you up after all this misery.
There really is only one way to cheer ourselves up right now. In fact, 3 little ways to cheer ourselves up.
I thought you were going to say 3 little things. A cup of green tea, or not another one for you, God help us, a coffee and an espresso martini.
Oh, God, I would love an espresso martini right now. No, I think I had a green tea crash. I think I was flying high and then crashed.
Yeah, something went wrong.
That story was kind of amazing and heartbreaking. And also, the woods are dangerous. Is that the takeaway here? If you go out in the woods today...
Yes, don't go into the woods.
Better beware. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Or if you do,
yes,
be careful.
Don't
be
go.
careful. It's getting cold on this side of the world. Yes.
Be prepared. Who says that? The Scouts.
Yes.
Be prepared.
Dib, 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 dob, dob, dob. Be prepared. That's it.
And with that, just remember, wherever you are,
whatever you do,
just keep eavesdropping.
Not in the woods.
Eavesdropping. 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 Eavesdropping.